The pyramids of Egypt are easily the most alluring monuments on the planet. Yet it isn't their grandeur alone which tempt their visitors. It is the mystery of their creation. These massive structures surpass even the most grand architectural creations of our day, yet, according to Orthodox historians, the Giza pyramids are around 5,000 years old. Despite their grandeur, they are lacking something that the grand never lack, an elaborate and fanciful creation story. In modern times, the completion of a monumental structure is surrounded by pomp and ceremony. Further still, every phase of the construction is usually well documented. But when taking an academic voyage through the Giza pyramids of Egypt and the surrounding monuments, one is struck by the complete absence of commemoration of these structures' construction methods and reasoning. Instead of countless depictions of laborers using ramps and pulleys to maneuver large blocks, we find flat, uninscribed walls on the interior of the pyramids. What's more is that archaeologists have yet to dig up even a trace of the building equipment used in the construction of the pyramids. Even more remarkable is that no inscription or depiction anywhere in the land of Egypt so much as mentions masses of men, huge blocks, and ramps in regards to the construction of the pyramids. Modern man has done much speculation regarding the reason for the building of the pyramids and the methods used. Experts of our day have suggested that the pyramids were built to be tombs, the eternal resting place of egomaniacal pharaohs, but without so much as a trace of the more practical construction methods. Even a skeptical observer would be forced to entertain the theories of the ancient Egyptians regarding their own creations. Those of ancient Egypt are unambiguous about the reasoning and construction methods of the pyramids. They claim that these structures were more like machines that allowed the king to join with the gods after death. They were essentially stargates to the heavens, where one could be transformed into a god. Instead of masses of men dragging large, perfectly cut stones from quarries miles away, the Egyptians say that magicians effortlessly cut and lifted the stones into place. The pyramid texts, the oldest known religious texts, state that the pyramids were built to throw open the doors of the firmament and make a road so that the deceased king might ascend into the company of the gods. The Egyptians also claim that the pyramids were built by magicians who used quote-unquote words of power to effortlessly levitate huge stones. The Mayan pyramids, although thousands of miles away and built thousands of years later, are said to have been built by the same method and for the same purpose as the pyramids in Egypt. The Mayan people of southern Mexico and Guatemala say that their pyramids were built by beings with magical powers, and that all they had to do was whistle and the heavy rocks would move into place. The Incan people, far south of the Mayans, claim that the massive stones used to build their great structures was carried through the air to the sound of a trumpet. The Mayan traditions state that their pyramids were where men became gods, and the place where gods are made. Curious that these far-flung civilizations would suggest that their pyramids were built the same way and for the same reason. The pyramid, as a symbol of transformation and rebirth, survives to this day. The universe has proven to be quite the onion. Its simple exterior betrays the senses. What science has called truths of the universe is in fact an ever-changing list of theories, each being no more than shades of gray closer to truth than the last. This is not, however, saying that anything but the ultimate truth is useless. Our list of ignorance is great, but our achievements using the half-truths is also great. Our knowledge of an electron, for example, is far from complete, and yet it didn't stop us from harnessing its power and using it as a source of energy and communication. As stated at the beginning of the book, the whole truth requires the mind of God, but it doesn't mean that we can't make application of half-truths. Even this text is nothing more than a long list of half-truths, but, as its author, I'm comforted by the fact that everything else you've ever read is likewise. Even books you believe to be inspired by God are subject to your interpretation, which you could never be 100% sure about, and can never prove conclusively. No scientist understands this better than quantum physicists. Unlike the elegant equations of Einstein and Newton, these poor bastards are knee-deep in hideous equations that are so hideous they couldn't possibly describe the universe, and at best only describe what the universe is likely to do, not what it absolutely will do. Quantum mechanics, or quantum physics, is a branch of physics that concerns itself with the smallest particles and spaces in the universe. As it turns out, the subatomic world is not what we expected. Traditionally, extremely small particles like electrons were thought of as tiny billiard balls, bouncing off of each other at mathematically predictable angles. And like billiard balls, their location, direction, and speed could be easily measured. On a subatomic level, particles exhibit strange properties and behaviors. Sometimes, particles would seem to disappear and reappear on the other side of a wall that, mathematically speaking, should have been impossible to penetrate. Other times, particles will seem to dance between the state of being a particle and being a wave. And measuring the subatomic world is also difficult, because in order to measure things like speed, location, and direction, one must build a sensor that interacts with the subatomic particle, thereby changing the course of destiny. Surely these poor scientists are frustrated by particles that always do something different just because they're not watching. It was once a philosophical question as to whether it was possible to break a stone into infinitely small pieces. Scientists and philosophers would speculate over the existence of an elementary particle, a particle that could not be broke apart, and represented the fundamental building blocks of the universe. This continued until evidence emerged that the universe was indeed made of unbreakable, fundamental particles, and these particles were called atoms. It would later be discovered that these particles weren't unbreakable, and were in fact composed of even smaller particles, dubbed subatomic, and included the proton, electron, and neutron. Later still, it was discovered that even these particles were in fact composed of even smaller particles called quarks. That appeared to be where the dividing stopped. Regardless of whether these quarks are indeed the smallest particles, scientists have been forced to conclude that the universe is made out of some kind of elementary particle. But the subatomic world wasn't done violating the rational mind of these poor researchers. As it turns out, even the nature of space and time had its peculiarities. Space and time were thought of as mediums that these elementary particles existed in, and up until the beginning of the 20th century, scientists were spared the grief of having to think of time and space as particles. But eventually came the day when scientists were forced to ponder nearly the same question that had plagued them centuries prior. Can time and space be broken into infinitely small parts? Can I nudge an object an infinitely small distance from where it once was? Can I measure the length of time between two events in infinitely small units? Can I break an inch or minute into as many pieces as I want? Do objects glide through space and time, or do they quote-unquote tick? After much reluctance, scientists were forced to admit that space and time also existed as elementary units, and these extremely small units were called Planck units. A Planck length represents the smallest length of space any object can move. So instead of particles gliding gracefully through space, they instead tick through space. This means that they essentially disappear and reappear one Planck length ahead in the direction that they were moving. What's more is that the particles also move through time likewise, and so disappear and reappear one Planck time in the future. Adding insult to injury, scientists are still unable to gracefully unify the separate forces of nature: gravity, magnetism, and the nuclear forces. These forces, once exclusively thought of as curves in space, are now spoke of in terms of particles as well: gravitons, photons, etc. Einstein envisioned gravity as no more than a warping in the shape of space that large objects create by their presence alone. Like a bowling ball placed at the center of a trampoline, a marble rolling on the surface of the trampoline will appear to be drawn to the bowling ball. Though it appears that the bowling ball has some kind of gravitational hold on the marble is only responding to the curvature of the trampoline fabric created by the bowling ball. As a result, the marble will begin to orbit the bowling ball in the center as a planet orbits a star. Today, quantum physicists speak of gravity as a real particle, a graviton, created by the bowling ball and felt by the marble, slowly drawing the marble closer to the bowling ball. I agree with Einstein's model, as opposed to the graviton model, because of how elegantly it explains changes in the passage of time and the complete lack of quote-unquote gravitational shadows. Even the Bible makes reference to the fabric of space. Countless Bible passages speak of the heavens as a fabric that can be stretched, torn, and folded in on itself. What's been the result of all this quantum confusion? From its beginning, quantum mechanics has been a duct-tape science, constantly patching holes rather than starting from a fundamentally sound model of the universe. Today, the quantum physicist claims that one may not even know the true location, state, and speed of a particle. Consequently, they believe that the universe is loaded with random numbers and therefore, like people, you may only know what the particle is likely to do, not what it will do. That's not science, that's superstition. The universe has proven itself to be mathematically perfect so far, and why would the world of the very small be any different? And where are these random numbers coming from anyway? The gods? A computer programmer knows a computer can't actually produce a random number, but instead can produce a series of numbers that appear random. Ancient man may have mistaken the locations of lightning strikes as being random, but the places lightning chooses to strike was never random, a fact we came to discover after we understood the nature of electricity. Ancient man may have mistaken storms and earthquakes as random, and perhaps angry gods, but the meteorologist and geologist knows better. At the latter part of his life, the greater scientific community considered Einstein washed up and obsolete because he simply refused to accept the idea that the universe is in any way random. Stating emphatically, God doesn't play dice. While the rest of the world accepted the universe's mystical nature, Einstein went to his deathbed trying to reconcile the microscopic and macroscopic worlds. In his heart, he knew that the truth of this apparent randomness was out there, and was probably as elegant as E=mc². Maybe Einstein would have done well by considering more than 4 dimensions in his deathbed equations. Occultists often refer to the universe in terms of layers, or dimensions, often called worlds or spheres. Similar to those who live in high-rise buildings, we too live with beings who exist above and below us. And like those high-rise dwellers, we too are both separated and yet affected by the comings and goings of our neighbors. The number of layers contained in the universe differs from one occult tradition to another. But in modern Western magic, it is typically the Hebrew Kabbalah and the dividing lines that it defines, which are most relied upon. The Kabbalah is a series of ancient Jewish texts that define the nature of reality, the number of universes, and the rulers of those universes. In the Kabbalah, the universe is divided into 10 parts, each called Sefirot. And these 10 Sefirot are further divided into 4 worlds and constitute separate universes, each containing its own ruler and inhabitants. The 4 worlds in which the 10 Sefirot are divided into are Atziluth, the divine world of archetypal ideas; Braya, the creative world of the archangels; Yetzirah, the astral world of angels and demons; Asaya, the material world. In the Kabbalah, and occult in general, the universe is seen as a series of layers where energy, originating from the top, cascades downwards, becoming increasingly solid. Each layer represents a slightly more solid reflection of the contents of the layers above. Since this energy, is constantly flowing down through the worlds. Any alteration occurring above will trickle down to the lower levels. It's curious that modern-day scientists, the self-proclaimed string theorists, are coming to the exact same conclusion as the ancient Kabbalah did, a 10-dimensional universe. Another system which is equally common, and probably more friendly to the human mind, is the breaking up of the universe into 5 layers. The first layer, spirit, represents the mind of God and is composed of pure energy. The layer below, the mental universe, represents a series of concepts and identities. Objects in the mental world do not respect time and space, but instead represent timeless identities, and one of these identities is the entity you call you, or your soul. The mental world is no more than a collection of concepts and thoughts. Things like rocks and trees do not exist on the mental plane. Only the idea or concepts of a rock and the concept of a tree. The third world, and perhaps most crucial to the magician, is the astral world. The astral world, unlike the mental world, is subject to a sense of space and time. The fourth of the worlds is the etheric. This world, sometimes used interchangeably with the astral world, is the universe that provides the foundation for the material plane. The etheric world is also where the life force, the energy created and used by life forms, resides. Finally, there's the fifth level of reality, the material universe. The operations of magic are rarely aimed at the lower level of reality, but instead, the magician will attempt to alter the higher levels of the universe, knowing that those changes will eventually trickle down to the etheric and material world. It is in this way does the magician alter reality by intention. The mental world, being nothing but concepts and thoughts, are affected by the magician in such a way as to produce predictable results on the lower levels of reality. One could argue that my distinction of mental, astral, etheric worlds is unnecessary or just plain wrong. Some occultists only make reference to 3 worlds, the divine, the astral, and the material. I'm satisfied as long as you understand the concept of cascading and slowly solidifying energy. But in truth, there's nothing slow about it. The objects in the separate worlds are copies of each other, tethered together by a rope. They respond instantly to changes in the others. As above, so below. Every individual has a copy of themselves on each of the 5 planes. These 5 copies of the self are not united, however, but instead divided into 3 pieces by 2 large gaps. The first gap is often referred to as the veil. And this veil not only divides the astral plane into 2 parts, it also divides the material body, called the lower self, from that person's guardian angel. Between the astral and the mental planes lies the second deep gap. This gulf is often called the abyss. The abyss is what separates a person from their higher self, often called their higher genius. The higher self is nothing more than copies of an individual which reside in the planes above and represent each person's connection to God. Further, the way the total universe is divided is also up for grabs. Some in the occult speak of 7 heavens, 7 hells, the astral and material planes. Others speak of only 4 partitions of the universe, the abyss, the heavens, the astral, and the earth. Others still speak of 4 partitions, the infernal, heaven, the astral, and the material. The cross-sections that occultists have divided the universe differs, but there is general agreement regarding the function and nature of the separate worlds. The concepts of heaven and hell are usually thought of as exclusively Christian, but this is far from the truth. Every religion and mythology out there makes reference to the heavens, the earth, and the underworld. In regards to the heavens, it is often described as an extra dimension that does indeed have some semblance of space and time. Satan and the angels, for instance, are spoke of as approaching the throne of God, as if there was a way to be in heaven, but not in the presence of the throne. This is important because it describes a lack of unity where, like in our material world, objects can be closer or farther from other objects. Obviously, there is some form of space and time in heaven. And proof of this lies in the fact that many of the stories about heaven related to us from the Bible, occult, and numerous mythologies include sequences of events and entities and objects both near and far. Heaven is also spoke of as having gates that deny its entry. Implied in this is that heaven and our world are connected by a guarded nexus point. What's more is that heaven itself is often spoke of as being broken into 7 pieces, the 7 heavens. Each level of the heavens is ruled by an archangel, and in some cases, these heavens have been mistaken for earthly locations. For example, I've heard occultists, texts of the Christian Apocrypha, and Muslims speak of the Garden of Eden as a location that resides in the 3rd heaven as opposed to a terrestrial location. Then there is hell, sometimes called the abyss, the cliff-off, the averse, or causal realms. Similar to how the heavens are broken into 7 pieces, hell is also considered to exist as separate worlds and, like the heavens, each partition has its own ruler. But unlike the material and heavenly realms, the 7 hells do not obey the strict laws of space and time that we are familiar with. These infernal realms are spoke of as places where chaos reigns. In the infernal places, the spatial dimensions are not perfectly straight and do not exist as perfect 90-degree angles. Here, the X, Y, Z, and time dimensions are curved and warped. If someone were to directly gaze upon the beings that exist in the infernal realms, they may be struck with an ache in the mind, because their very shape is unnatural to our senses. Sometimes, one will find the underworld divided into 2 realms. The first is Hades, which is the land of the dead, and then there's Hell, or Gehenna. Hades, also called Sheol, is considered the land of the dead, where all people, both righteous and unrighteous, go when they die, whereas Hell is a place specifically for unrighteous entities to experience torment and imprisonment. And unlike popular conception, neither is said to be currently burning and aflame. In the Bible, for instance, it is stated that only after all beings are judged, Judgment Day, both Hell and Hades will then be cast into the lake of fire, and all those quote-unquote unsaved will undergo a second death and remain forever tormented in the lake of fire. Currently, however, members of the occult, and the Bible as well, speak of both places as being timeless, limitless, cold, dark, and chaotic.